Hello everyone, and welcome to Watercolor Wednesdays. And today we're going to be painting a really simple winter scene of just 3 birches in the snow. It's important to me that these projects are super easy for beginners, and that's the whole intention, something quick and satisfying that you can do and have good results. So today I'm going to be using my Wild Thorn handmade watercolors, but only 2 colors, that is a cobalt blue and also a burnt sienna. So you could use any watercolors in those 2 colors and you would be fine. Even another blue like French ultramarine would be fine, but the burnt sienna is really important. So I'm going to start out by just tracing a little rectangle on my watercolor paper. I'm using Birches 90-pound paper because it is so lightweight and affordable for practicing. You could even use any student grade cold press watercolor paper. So I'm tracing around this little subway card and I want to say this is maybe like 3 by 4 inches or something like that. Pretty small. We're going to keep this project small. So once that's done, I'm going to use just a basic HB pencil and I'm going to draw a simple scene, okay, with just a slope of land, which is going to be snow, and then 3 long rectangles coming out of it. You can copy exactly what I did here, or you can make up your own drawing. So now we'll continue on with those 3 tree trunks. You can copy exactly what I'm doing here, or you can also make up your own combination and tilt of the tree trunks. Keep it very simple though, and I also want to talk about why I'm doing things in real time. A lot of how-to videos use time-lapse, obviously to save time, and sometimes it's a great thing when you're working on like a 5 or 6 hour project and want to show it to someone from start to finish. But for these beginner tutorials, for very, very beginner watercolorists, I think it's so important to watch the demonstration in real time. You can watch it once all the way through, and then you can watch it again and try along with me. So you'll notice that I go kind of slowly, and that's intentional because I want you to be able to work along with me at the same time. You can always stop and start again as well, but it's just very important that, at least I think it is, that you have a slower kind of demonstration for these projects. So once we have finished with our drawing and erased kind of where that tree went over, over the snowbank, I want you to use a kneaded eraser and just sort of press it around your paper to lighten up those graphite lines. It's really important that we do that because we don't want our pencil lines to show through our painting too much, especially when we're doing lighter colors like birch trees and snow. All right, our drawing is now done and it is time to mix up our paint. And like I said before, we're only going to be using 2 colors, and that is a blue color, and I'm using cobalt blue from Wild Thorn, and a burnt sienna. So I'm swatching out my cobalt blue here so you can see it's a really nice bright blue. And then the burnt sienna is a very warm kind of rusty brown. Both beautiful colors on their own, but together they make these gorgeous luminous grays. So I'm going to start out by putting some of the cobalt blue in my palette and then adding just a touch of the burnt sienna to gray it out a little bit. I want to add a little bit more water so that it's a lighter wash, maybe a little bit more blue here. And I'm going to use this color for my sky. And I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to go across the top of the sky, and I'm going to paint in between the trees in each section between those tree trunks. Okay, I'm going to start at the top with the pure cobalt blue mix, and then once I get about halfway down, I'm just going to use a clean damp brush to bring that paint all the way down to the horizon line. And I'm going to work across the page doing this. All right, each one I'm going to start with the pure color, and then about halfway down I'm going to switch over to just a clean damp brush to pull that color all the way down. Typically, you know, our skies are darker at the top of like a picture. If you take a photograph, you'll notice that the sky, a blue sky, can be very dark at the top and then get lighter as it reaches the horizon line. And we're going to mimic the same thing here, but I'm also going for kind of that snowy, misty look. So you'll notice as I move along that as you bring that water glaze from the from the middle of the sky down, it starts to kind of look like hazy clouds a little bit, and it's really pretty. So I'll just continue to work across the sky, bringing the pure cobalt from the top to about the middle, and then using a clean, damp brush to pull that wash all the way down to the horizon line. Try to take care around the tree trunks. Just use your brush carefully, and just make sure you kind of stay on the outside of those tree trunks, outside of your pencil lines. And if you do run out of your blue color, you can always mix up a little bit more like I have. Sometimes that happens. But when we keep our palette simple, it's so much easier to mix more color because we don't have to remember too much when we're only using 2, 3, or 4 colors. Okay, and so once I've finished and I've gone all the way across, I'm going to drop in a little bit more blue of the blue mix across the top, just to darken it up a tiny bit. I feel like I needed it to be a little bit darker up there, and you can do the same. As long as our paint is still wet, it's perfectly fine to drop in more pigment. And then I'm just going to take some clear water and I'm going to drop it in the whiter section just to emphasize, kind of push that pigment around and emphasize kind of that misty, cloudy look that I was talking about. Okay, now I am going to put my brush down and let this dry. Now that my painting is dry, my sky is dry, I'm going to use an eraser and I'm going to lightly go across the horizon line to see if I can't get up some of the pencil marks that I still see. It's okay if some of them show through, but it's best if you can try to remove them. At least that's my preference. So I'll just move across and just lightly try to erase it. I try to be gentle with the paper. This is just the eraser that is on the back of the mechanical pencil. And brush it off and we'll be ready to paint some more. So now I'm going to mix up some darker gray mix so we can paint the tree trunks. And I'm starting with some of my blue and then adding in about an equal amount of the burnt sienna. And you'll see that it turns this beautiful kind of luminous gray right away. I'm adding a little bit more blue and a little bit more burnt sienna because I want it to be rich enough. So let me swatch this out and see. That's almost perfect. So you see that pretty gray color? I'm going to add a little bit more though, just to make sure I have enough to go across all of the tree trunks. But I always swatch it out again, just to make sure that it's what I want. Actually, that's just about right. All right, so I'm going to rinse my brush off. And with these tree trunks, we're going to start with something that's called a water glaze. So I'm going to use a clean brush with some water on it. And I'm going to start at the right-hand side, and that's just because I'm left-handed. If you're right-handed, I would start on the left-hand side. And I'm going to paint a clear glaze of water over the tree trunk, very carefully, so I'm staying within the boundaries of that tree trunk, and just painting that clear water glaze from the top to the bottom. Usually once I get to the bottom, I go over the whole thing again just to make sure I have a nice even surface for the paint to move across. Then to pick up that gray paint and just using the tip of my brush, I'm going to move along the right side and drop that paint in a line all the way down to the bottom. And when I do this, you'll notice that the paint starts to spread across from right to left. In my imaginary little winter scene, I'm imagining that the sun is coming from the top left, and so the right side of the trees would be a little bit in shadow, and that's what I'm trying to create here. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing on all 3 tree trunks, starting with the water glaze from top to bottom. And then once I get to the bottom, I usually move over the whole thing once more just to make sure my glaze is nice and even. it's almost like you're creating an ice skating rink for your paints to glide across. And again, I'm going to take that gray and I'm going to, using the tip of my brush, I'm going to drop it along the right side, all the way down to the bottom. Sometimes I go back in and drop a little bit more if I feel like it needs to be darker. And again, one more water glaze on our last tree trunk, taking it from the top to the bottom, very careful along the edges. And give it one more kind of swoosh over when you're done to make sure it's nice and even. And then I'll pick up that last of my gray mix and drop that along the right side using the tip of my brush. All the way down to the bottom. Okay. And sometimes I do fuss a little bit more at the end and just sort of make sure everything's the way I want it. While the paint's still wet, we can still fix our edges and move things around a bit. But I'm pretty happy with this. All right, so now we're going to actually mix up more of our gray mix, but we're going to make it a little bit darker this time. And that just means more paint and less water. So I'm going to start with a bunch of the cobalt blue in my palette. And then I'll add some of the burnt sienna, just about equal amounts. And I'll start to get that gray color, and then I'm just going to add a little bit more of each until I arrive at a nice dark gray mix. I always swatch it out to make sure it's what I'm looking for, but I'm going to add a little bit more to this. I think it needs to be a bit darker. And I'll swatch it out again. And that's just about perfect, maybe a little bit more of the burnt sienna. Yeah, I'm really happy with that. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to get lots of paint on our brush, and we're just sort of dry our brush off a little bit, and we're going to start painting some branches coming out from the tree. And the important thing here is to use the very tip of your brush and keep it kind of loose and start at the tree trunk and then pull it up and out, just like so. You can do a couple of them on each tree trunk. There's no rhyme or reason to it really. Just you can copy exactly what I'm doing here. You can look at photographs of trees, but just keep it simple. You know, we all know how a tree branch comes out from a trunk. It just kind of starts a little bit thicker, gets thinner toward the end, and sometimes they branch off into 2, 3, 4 pieces. But we're going to keep this as simple as possible here. We're just going to move across and add some interest to our little painting with some tree branches. Once we have them down, I usually like to take just a clean damp brush and sort of go over where the tree branch joins the tree trunk and just kind of let them melt together a little bit. Just gives it a more natural appearance, just in case we put some hard lines down that we didn't want. So I'm going to continue across each of the tree trunks, excuse me, and adding in some branches, letting them fork off into 2 sections if it feels right. But again, keeping it as simple as possible, just to add a little bit of interest. You can also practice this on a piece of paper if that would make you more comfortable before you actually commit to your painting, and just draw some tree trunks and practice some branches with the tip of your brush. I tend to find that the looser I am, the better. They just kind of flow better and look more natural, but sometimes it does take practice. And then I'll go across, and sometimes I just put a few little darker bits across the tree trunks. If you look at birch trees, they sometimes have those dark lines that move across them. And I'll go all the way across all 3 tree trunks, adding in a little bit more texture and interest. So believe it or not, we're almost finished here with our little painting. But we're going to put some shadows in the snow. And I'm going to take some of the gray that I already had and add a tiny bit more blue to it. Check it out here on my swatches. I'm really happy with that. Just a lighter gray shadow color with a little bit more blue. All right, and I'm going to paint just a stroke of it kind of in a downward direction because we have a slope. Our tree is on a slope, and so the shadow would be sloping as well. And I'm just painting a little stripe down, and then once it's down, I'll just take a clean, damp brush and just smooth it on either side so it just softens that edge and it doesn't look so harsh. We don't have to be really crazy about this or hyper realistic. This is just a little painting, and it should just give the suggestion of a shadow on the snow. Okay, so paint another one down the other tree trunk onto the snow, and then again a clean damp brush just to soften those edges on either side. Sometimes I'll go back and soften them a couple times. And then the last one is just a tiny little bit you need to add in because it's almost kind of going off the page. Just a few final touches softening those and just maybe adding a bit more darker gray, just dropping it into those shadows kind of in the middle. And there we have a simple winter scene of birch trees and snow. So what a great little project using only 2 colors, a cobalt blue or any blue watercolor and burnt sienna. I hope you'll try it again and maybe even make it a little bit more of a complicated scene, but once you get those techniques down, you can try just about anything. Again, thanks for joining me. I hope you'll visit me on my website at katirahewing.com. You'll find a little more information there, and subscribe to my channel for updates on all the latest videos. Thanks so much for being here.